So hi, Neel. Welcome to the Scarsdale Library.
Thank you.
We have been talking for the last hour about your book. I know I really loved it.
Thank you.
And we've been picking everything apart and the characters and plot and some of your choices and all of that. So it's been really great. I have so many questions for you, and I hope our readers do too. First, I would love to know where this came from.
Yeah, I knew I had written a short story collection called If You See Me Don't Say Hi, which was sort of kind of thematically similar. It was about being brown in America. It was about sexuality and kind of ambition and all these things in immigration. And I had to write this novel because I was under contract. And yeah, I was scared that they were going to ask for the advance back, and I already spent it. So I went, I wasn't getting anywhere, and I was like, I need to go home. So I went to my hometown in Illinois just before the pandemic hit. And that stay ended up being a lot longer than I anticipated. I thought I was just going to go home for a couple months. I ended up being there almost an entire year.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but it was kind of the best thing ever because I was able to kind of reconnect with this past life that I had in this kind of small Midwestern town and all of things that I was feeling, and this sense of like isolation and alienation. And I just kind of came up with this character, Akash. And I realized like his story wasn't complete without his mother's story. And I started with this one line, which is, my mother always told me to be a good boy. I suspect she knew that I wasn't. And it kind of opened up this theme of like, what does it mean to be good? And kind of both characters are grappling with this idea. Like Renu feels like she's not a good wife, or she wasn't a good wife, she wasn't a good mother. And Akash feels in many ways that he wasn't a good son. And it kind of built from there. So
It's so interesting because it seems like they're grappling with really similar feelings, and that their stories are sort of parallel. And we were just talking about how interesting it is at the points where their stories diverge. With now I can't even talk properly. With them both having all of this longing, and both of them having these feelings of not living the lives they're supposed to be living, and having outside pressures. But Ashok, and we've been talking spoilers, so I hope that's okay with you.
Yeah.
But Ashok ultimately gets to have a reconciliation in a sense. And Renu does not. But they still don't end up with what they want. But they have these really parallel feelings that I don't think that neither of them are aware of.
Yeah.
So was that structure intended initially?
No, I think I kind of initially I just wanted to figure out who they were, and I just wanted to live in their worlds. But as I started to move through the story, I realized, yeah, they do both kind of have similarities in they're both like reaching into the past, and they're feeling a lot of regret. And but I think what isn't there is this communication. And I know for me, growing up in a lot of, I think, especially like South Asian families, communication and many families, communication is so difficult. I think it's so interesting how you can grow up with people and live in the same house as them, and you can be worlds apart in your head.
Yes.
And you have no idea what they're thinking or feeling, and they're literally just down the hall, or standing in front of you in the kitchen. And I was kind of thinking about that and all the things that I couldn't say to my parents, and probably all the things that they couldn't say to me. And I know with Renu in particular, I was interested in my mother's kind of experience, in that I don't really know much about her past. She's very private. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that she comes from a generation where women weren't allowed to have indiscretions, and they certainly weren't allowed to talk about that. And with my dad, I know so much about him. I know that he streaked across campus. I know that he had like all these different girlfriends. I know that he was a daredevil. He like flunked out of med school and had to reapply. And like, I knew all this stuff, and it was always kind of like a joke and like kind of that boys will be boys mentality. And like, it's okay for them, but women especially in this community had to kind of be just perfect. And they had to be the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect mother. And there was no room for like mistakes. And so I was just thinking, what does that look like years later when you've repressed so much?
It comes out with some really difficult feelings for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you is, I mean, I don't know how many books, movies, TV shows, anything that I've come across really deal with the intersection of queer identity and South Asian culture. I don't know that I've seen it.
Yeah.
You haven't either?
No, not really.
So what makes the intersection of queer identity and South Asian culture different from so many other stories that we see?
Mm-hmm.
How does that play out?
Yeah, I think so there's a saying in Hindi, it's called Lokia kahenge. And like, if you're familiar with Hassan Minhaj or anyone like that, they talk about this a lot. Lokia kahenge means what will people say? And you know, our community in particular is very concerned about what people will say about us. And I think a lot of that has to do with immigration and living in a country that doesn't really feel like your own. And so what happens is these Indian people come to America and they immediately seek out other Indian people because it's a safe space.
Yeah.
And it's great. But the downside to that is you have these really tightly knit communities where everyone's in each other's business. And, you know, like I know with parents, like, you know, they don't know how to, my parents didn't know how to raise a child in America. They'd never done it. So what do? They measure their success as a parent by seeing how you compare to their other people's kids. So if other people's kids are excelling at things, or, you know, then your kids should be too. Or if they're not, you know, going wild or getting in trouble, then your kids shouldn't be doing that, you know? And
right.
So it's so, I think it instills in us this fear of other people's perceptions of us. So then it makes us really kind of, we don't have an outlet. And I didn't see South Asians being openly gay when I was growing up.
Yeah.
You know, I did see like I saw Will and Grace and I saw that, but like I never saw South. There was this idea that this isn't for us, that this is like an American thing, or this is like a white people thing, and we don't do that, you know? But really the reality is we're just not being open about it because we don't think we can. So
yeah, I mean, I have a few Indian gay friends, and they're like, it took me a long time to come out.
Yeah. And you know what's funny is there's like, through this book, I've connected with so many queer Indian people. I'm like, I didn't know there were so many of us. Like it's not even like there's a few. It's like now I think like all Indians are gay.
That's great. I love it. You know, and I think a lot of that worry comes out in the shame in both of those characters. And I think the expectations, we were just talking about expectations of what happens when your child comes out, and where the disappointments lay, and how that plays out for so many people. And I think it similarly comes down to expectation. So it's like, okay, well, you're not living the life that I wanted you to live.
Yeah.
So, and I think that comes out with Akash and with Bijal. Like they have they've had these pressures of expectation, and, you know, Bijal seems to try to follow that as much as he can, and it's not going so well. And Akash is like, screw it, I'm just going to go live my life.
Yeah.
And is struggling with it too.
Right.
So, and I struggled with Bijal a lot. I was like, he's just kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
Like, why is he such a jerk?
Yeah. But you know, like I always had a soft spot for him when I was writing him, just because I know those people. I know Bijals.
Yeah.
I've grown up with Bijals, and I know that like deep down there is someone good. they're just struggling with this. And especially I think being an older sibling, he has the has the burden of like his parents' expectations. And I think the complication of having sibling relationships, because I have an older sibling, and she was a straight A student, she did everything right. And I remember there were moments where I was just screwing up left and right. And she felt like, see, I have to be the good one, because we can't both be bad. Like, we can't put that on mom and dad. So if I'm struggling, then she has to be holding down the fort, you know, and vice versa. And it's interesting because now the roles have reversed a little bit. Like, she's had some issues, and so now I'm the good kid. So I'm like, oh, this is kind of nice. Like, keep doing it.
Yep. I hear you. I know those roles very well, believe me.
Hey, Katie.
Yes.
This is Peggy. I have a quick question. It didn't come up in our earlier conversation, but Neel, what was an eye opener for me is that Renu grew up in East Africa, correct?
Yes.
And so I thought she's Indian. But her parents are born in India, but they emigrated to East Africa. Yes. And so my question then is, how are the Indians from East Africa different from if she had grown and if she had been raised in India?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it makes a difference, but as a Black woman, I thought, she doesn't refer to herself as African or East African, but she refers to herself as Indian.
Yeah, that was also very confusing for me as a child, because I would be in school and like, wait, you're Indian, but you're not Native American, but your parents are from Africa. And it's very confusing. You know, when I say Indian, I think of like ethnicity, like I'm brown, I'm Indian. And if, you know, I think my grandparents were from India, but the culture of Indians in East Africa is different because, you know, essentially they're like second generation. So they've left home and they've gone somewhere. So the way I'm different because I'm born and raised in America, my parents were different because they were born and raised in East Africa, and the culture is a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more progressive. So like, you know, for example, alcohol. My mother drinks alcohol. She eats meat. For a South Asian woman, that's still pretty uncommon of her generation. And what's interesting is I've seen my mother be around other Indian women and decline a glass of wine because none of them were drinking, but the men were drinking. And I used to tell my mom, like, why don't you just have a drink? Why does it matter if the other women are drinking? And she's like, no, it looks bad, you know? So little things like that, you know, are different from Indians from India. So I know when we grew up in Illinois, when I grew up in Illinois, my parents felt they didn't fully fit in anywhere because they didn't necessarily fully fit in with white people, but they didn't fully fit in with Indian people either because their culture was a little bit more modern. And so, yeah.
Thank you for that context, because I didn't know that there were large populations of Indian folks living in Tanzania.
Yeah, you know, a lot of people don't know, even Indian people don't know. Like, it's because of colonialism and when, yeah.
It's in everything.
Yeah. So, and I know that there was like a big wave of migration when the British were building a railroad that connected Kenya to Uganda. So they were bringing in a lot of Indians to work in like the offices and work. And so my grandfather, because my dad is from Kenya, my grandfather was a conductor on the train there. So yeah, so there is a large population of South Asian.
Interesting. I have to say, I loved the role of music in this.
Oh, yeah.
I think you and I are about the same age.
Okay.
So this was all, you know, the soundtrack of my childhood as well.
Yeah.
Was it why R&B?
I love R&B music. I mean, I love hip hop and R&B both, and specifically R&B. I just feel like it's such, it's the closest, I think, musical expression of love. Like it just feels, you feel the emotions of it. And most R&B music is about love. I mean, I think almost every R&B song is either about love or like the expression of love or even the physical act of love or whatever it is, but it all centers around love. And that's what I love about it. And I remember like listening to certain songs when I was a kid. And then, you know, when you have like a crush on someone and then there's like a particular song
Oh yeah.
on the radio, and you forever associate with that person, which always sucks because then when you're older, like you still think about that, or like if it's an ex or something, you know. So it's just, you know, music is such a big part of like memory. And because these characters are living in the past, especially with Akash, he's like reaching into the past, like music is a part of that. And it's like, this is the music that he grew up on and that he was listening to when he was with Parth, who he was in love with. And I knew that I wanted music to be, you know, a part of the book.
I loved the moments where Akash and Parth were listening to music together, just because, I mean, that was my being a teenager. That, you know, it's music.
And it was before like YouTube and like TikTok and
taping things off the radio.
Yeah, taping things off the radio.
Hoping that you get the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, I have questions here. Is the music that he writes sort of merely a way to go back to those good nostalgic times, or is it something else?
I think it's partly that. I definitely think it's partly that. And I think it's just, you know, it's an expression of yourself. And I think when you bottle so much of yourself inside, it has to come out in some way. So if it's not going to come out in honest, open dialogue with people, it's going to come out in music or poetry or whatever it is you do, you know. And for him, it's writing songs.
I love that. I love that. I definitely spent some time listening to some Lauryn Hill this week.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Always a good one. Yeah.
What is it? The role of addiction. What, you know, Akash is really struggling with his alcoholism. It destroys his relationship. It, I mean, among other things. What made you choose that? I mean, because it makes him an unreliable character for sure. I thought it was an interesting choice to add that on top of the struggles with his sexuality and being home and having all this nostalgia. What was behind that decision?
I think it's really kind of connected to everything, you know, and it's no secret, like gays like to party and like, you know, you know, gays love to party. And I live in LA and like West Hollywood is not that far. And like you go to West Hollywood and it's just party central all the time. And, you know, the thing is like, yes, we like to have a good time, but we're also kind of like self-medicating sometimes. We experienced a lot of trauma and some, you know, I didn't even realize half the things I was experiencing as a child was trauma, you know, but this baseline anxiety that I had where I was afraid every day at school because I was afraid of being outed or I was afraid of being bullied for being queer, that just kind of, that doesn't go away. You know, you have to work through it. But sometimes the easiest thing to do is pick up a bottle or do some drugs or whatever. And I've definitely struggled with drinking in my life. So that was definitely personal for me. Like alcohol became kind of this, you know, numbing device. So, yeah.
I think Akash carries a lot of internalized homophobia too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think when he's with his boyfriend, like things are okay, but there's this like not quite ready, but I think there's a lot of internalized homophobia there. And I think he self-sabotages a lot as a result of that. You know, whether it's the drinking or the grinder dates, or I mean, both of which can be super fun, I'm sure. But
it's like distracting yourself from what's happening inside, you know?
Yeah, it's a quick fix. But I think he carries a lot of that. And I wonder about the decision to also make Parth gay and his reaction to Akash and the internalized homophobia involved in that too. I mean, it's layers upon layers of cultural trauma.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like we were all just kind of afraid, really, to be here, you know, and afraid of what we were feeling and not knowing what to do with it. So it's like, yeah, when Parth pushes Akash away, it's not because he isn't gay or doesn't like Akash. It's because he was really afraid of what this means. And I know for me, like being in the closet, when I was in the closet, I was very committed to being in the closet. Like I was playing a role. Like I should have won an award for that. I was like a method actor. Like I was just really committed to it. So I didn't even like allow myself to be on like Grindr or anything. I just shut that part out completely. Because I think I knew that the minute I did that, I was acknowledging to myself that it was real. And if as long as I didn't, I could pretend like it wasn't, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think the bullying parts of things too were really visceral. And I think Parth got a view of that too.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mind my asking your coming out story or?
Yeah, I came out in phases, so it wasn't this like big kind of moment where everybody knew. I first came out to my friend at his bachelor party.
Oh my God, really?
In a strip club, like in a straight strip club with women, half naked women. And the reason I came out is because he was really drunk and it was his bachelor party. And he's like, Neel, I just want you to know, like, you know, it's okay. Are you gay? Like, it's okay. Like, we don't care. Like, you know, like, I support you. And the thing is, even though he was drunk, that was actually the first time anyone had ever phrased it that way. No one had ever said it that way. People were always just like making jokes about it. Like, and then I was like, do they really think I'm gay or are they homophobic? They would just they would frame it in a joke. And then this time, this person's actually saying, hey, are you gay? Because if you are, it's okay. And I support you. So then I just, yeah. And the funny thing is we spent the entire night talking about that. And like, he wasn't getting lap dances or anything like. And then after that, I just slowly started to come out to friends because by that point, this was around like when I think 2009, this is when everyone was pushing for marriage equality.
Okay.
I think that had a lot to do with it. Because I looked around at social media and I was like, oh, wow, like all these people that I assumed were homophobic aren't, you know, or they're performing. Yeah, no, a lot of them probably were performing, but I'm like, okay, at least they're performing. At least they're pretending to be, you know what I mean? Because I grew up in the era of, I'm sure you did, the blatant homophobia, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So this was better. So this was like, I was like, oh, okay. So then I started slowly, and then it wasn't until later that my parents found out, and they found out in not an ideal way because my first book was out, and even though there were stories about queer characters, I don't think it connected to them. I just assumed they knew. And we never talked about it. I just assumed they knew, and I think we just weren't going to speak about it because they weren't like telling me, oh, you need to marry this woman or something. You know, a lot of Indian parents like to do that. They weren't doing that with me, so I figured, oh, they must know. But it wasn't until I did an interview with an online journal and I was open about my sexuality. I didn't know if anyone would read it. I didn't realize my dad was Googling my name because he was like excited about everything. And I get this phone call at 10:30 at night. And you know, when you get a call at night, it's because either something bad happened or you did something bad. So I'm just thinking, okay, what did I do this time? And then it's like, oh, I was born. And so they were like, my dad's like, is this true? And I said, yes. And the first thing he said was, okay, that's fine. We love you. And then the first thing my mom said is, who else knows? And she had to be like typical Indian mom. She had to go into PR mode and like get ahead of the narrative and make sure that. But now they're fine. And actually the best thing was, again, we're still never going to be the most open with each other. So she won't tell me these things, but she'll tell my sister. So my sister told me that just a year ago, she told my sister like, well, I really hope he finds a nice man now. So Yeah. And then I also was like, wow, like they just want you to be with someone. Like they don't want you to
I can
like
relate to that.
yeah, it's like you just can't be single. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's first of all, bachelor party hysterical. That's such a great story. And secondly, you're right. I mean, like when we were growing up, it was really tough. Not to make this about me, but I was the only even remotely out person in my entire high school, which caused a lot of difficulty. But it was something to be made fun of. It was something to be ashamed of. It was something to have to hide or whatever. And how dare you for not hiding?
right.
So in the 90s. So I totally understand where your characters were coming from, that fear and the bullying, and it was loud too.
Yeah.
You know, I don't feel like getting thrown in a dumpster, you know, getting called a fag and getting thrown in a dumpster would go over so well right now.
No.
Like it did then, you know.
Oh
so
yeah. No, I was like, I mean, some of the things that I experienced were actually in like that actually happened to me. It wasn't a dumpster, but it was a garbage can like in the locker room, you know. And the thing is, like, what's interesting is now when I look back on it, I'm like, that's like a lawsuit. Like, you know what I mean? Like the school didn't even, the school didn't even do anything, like, you know. And I'm like, wow, it's just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the community here, one of the communities nearby me, I live in a very queer, very diverse community.
Oh, nice.
One of the towns over has been making the news over and over again because they're not known for being terribly progressive or terribly accepting, and their GSA's billboard keeps getting vandalized, and it's making local news. So I think about, I'm like, first of all, when I was in high school, there was no GSA. There was no support. There was no like outward help for kids who were struggling and were queer and like trying to figure out who they were and looking to adults for support, or looking to each other for support. It's just so interesting to me how much that has changed, because I feel like that story of getting thrown in a dumpster or getting assaulted in a locker room would never fly now in the same ways. Like it just wouldn't happen.
Right.
So, I mean, maybe it's kind of a nice reminder to see how far we've come.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Katie, I have a question for Neel, if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah. Neel, you lightly touched on the challenge that Renu had by being Hindu and being and loving a Muslim. And if you can just talk more about that, because I don't know enough about Indian culture, so I'm thinking, I know you don't speak for all Indians, but might as well pick your brain.
Sure.
And is that still a current issue, or was that an issue like 35 years ago? Or and how does that, and because it seems like that was another complication in her relationship with what's the gentleman's name again?
Kareem.
Kareem. I keep wanting to say yeah.
Kareem. Yeah. So Hindus and Muslims sort of, again, this is another colonialism thing where the British like divided, I believe. India and Pakistan used to be one, and then they were divided during British rule. And the majority of Pakistanis are Muslim and the majority of Indians are Hindu. However, there is like crossover. There are Muslims living in India. And there's just always been kind of turmoil between the two communities. There's been a lot of violence on both sides, you know, Hindus attacking Muslims, Muslims attacking Hindus. The religion is sort of very different. And in the way that, like, you know, what we're seeing with Palestine, there's just a lot of sort of political strife. And so, yes, in those days, it was really taboo for a Hindu and a Muslim to be romantically involved. And, you know, people have had to run away because of it, and leave their families because of it. And so it obviously was there, a big complication for Renu. And again, I wanted that kind of story to parallel Akash's story of forbidden love. Like even she experienced forbidden love in a way. And nowadays, you know, unfortunately, it's still a big deal in families, you know. There's still a lot of like fear. I can only speak for Hindu. My family's Hindu. I can only speak for Hindu. There is a lot of fear among Hindus of having your child be romantically involved with someone who's Muslim. The fear that maybe you'll have to convert to that religion or whatever. So it is difficult, but it's not impossible. And there are now many couples that are like interfaith. So.
And so, why did Hakeem not come to the restaurant?
Oh yeah, that's always been the question. You know, and I didn't really know what was going to happen in that scene. I was building to it. And I think when I got to it, I realized that he wasn't important. And I wasn't actually that interested in him. I was more interested in everyone else. And I realized that he represented this kind of like alternate life that she could have had. And because she didn't get that choice, it was the one thing that was nagging at her whole life. Like, what would it have been like if I had married Kareem or run away with him? And ultimately, when I got to this part, I realized that what was most important to Renu was her family. It was her son, it was Bijal, it was even Ashok and the memory of this relationship they had. And Kareem really didn't matter. So there are several like theories that people have had, because some people were very close readers and they're like, oh, there was like police sirens. So like maybe he died, maybe something happened to him. And I actually wrote that on purpose, thinking that was gonna be something that happened. And then I realized, like, how can I do that to her? She's been through so much. Like, that's too much. Like, how many people can die? So I just was like, you know what? Maybe he doesn't show up because I was like, what would happen if he did show up? Either it's a happily ever after, but then what does she learn? Or it's a disappointment, but then that's just a bigger disappointment. What does she do with that? You know? And I thought in him not showing up, she's forced to look at what she does have. And there's a line in the book, I think it says like, sometimes the things we most desire are not always what we need. And this was a desire, but it wasn't what she needed. And what she needed was there all along. And she needed to just find it.
I was heartbroken for her.
Yeah.
I was heartbroken for her because I wanted her to finally like have that resolution. And I totally agree with your decision, because I think it ultimately moved things forward and she sort of had her greater understanding of everything and could stop pining and stop all of that. But then again, Akash has that interaction with Parth.
Yeah.
So I think he had a sense of resolution in his own way too.
Yeah.
Was it meant to be like aha, I knew it? Was it I can let this go now?
I think he needed to be able to let it go.
Yeah.
And I knew that both mother and I knew that at the center of this, it was a love story between a mother and a son. And I knew that like both mother and son had to find each other. And in not getting what they wanted, you know, they found each other. And and so yeah, with Parth, you know, I kind of like, I mean, yeah, it just I didn't feel like it was realistic for him to be with him after so many years. I think it was more that he just needed to like reconcile what happened.
Yeah. I think you made the right decisions because it really it made a lot of sense and it gave them that resolution. That I
And
think
Renu's young, you know, she can find someone new. Like she's
one of the things I really loved about this is I think it's so taboo for older women to be talking about sexuality, and maybe in particular Indian women. One of the discussion books that I had chosen maybe a year ago was Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows.
Yeah.
Which is so much about giving these women the freedom to explore their own sexualities in a way where they've felt that they've been really repressed in the past. So I kind of love that her longings were really put on the page, and that whether it's an Indian woman or not, like I feel like older women are really not allowed to express their sexuality in open terms. So it was nice to get her ruminations on those sort of things.
Yeah.
So I applaud you for that.
Thank you.
I have a question that's a little out of left field. I listened to the audiobook. Okay. Did you have any input into the choice of the narrator? Because he did an incredible job.
Yes, and I've heard from I haven't listened to the whole thing, but I've heard from several people that he's done an amazing job.
He was amazing.
Yeah, and for him to do like Renu's voice and Akash's voice and do it so well. So I did listen to a sample, and I think he was the first person they found. And I listened to it, and I was like, oh, I like his rendition of it. So they
he gave Bijal a very deep voice.
Yeah.
And every time Taylor spoke, I was cracking up because she had this like squeaky little annoying voice. So it was really great. He did such a good job. So I'm always curious to ask authors when I do listen to their books if they have any part of that process.
Yeah, well, I narrated my first book, and that was so like I have a lot of respect for people who are in a recording booth, like doing voiceover or narrating. It's so hard. Those microphones pick up every sound. Like, so if you're hungry or whatever, like it's picking up everything. So you have to be like well fed, but not too well fed, because then it's gonna pick up your burping and like, oh, so like it's grueling. It's so many hours. It's
Oh, I can only imagine. And then what's it like to read your own work so closely after working on it so hard?
It was cool. I mean, in a way, I liked it because I don't know, I felt like I was experiencing it in a different way than I had previously just writing it and reading it. So it was nice to hear it out loud. So I did enjoy it, but I was like, I definitely could not do a novel. That's a lot.
Well, you have a lot of characters too.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to totally monopolize the conversation here. But I kind of want to know if you're working on anything now.
Yes, I am. Well, so I'm actually developing a book for TV.
Really? Yeah. Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, it's in the very early stages. I'm working with some producers, and we're probably gonna find a network partner in the next few months, and I'm gonna be writing the pilot. So that's been exciting to kind of reimagine it as a TV
and
show.
You're a screenwriter by trade ordinarily, right?
Yeah, like I'm kind of both. I started out doing fiction, and then it got me into TV. So
interesting. So what's the process of writing for screen versus writing a novel versus writing short stories? Like, is there a different mentality? Do you have a different process?
There's definitely a different mentality. Like, I feel like there's a lot more people people chiming in. It's executives, it's producers. So you gotta like, think about an audience and things juicy and like, so yeah, it's different, but I like it because there's this kind of like immediate just diving in and getting into the dialogue and not having to set up the scene fully and the voice and the prose and all that. So yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've read a fair number of books that I feel like have been written for that purpose.
Mhm.
And I always find it such a turnoff
Yeah.
when it's like, I want to read a book. I don't
Yeah.
want to read a screenplay. Like if I want to read a screenplay, I'll watch the show, you know? So I think there are quite a few writers that maybe write for screen in their novels, which I always find to not be so successful.
Yeah.
So I was just curious about the switching gears because this didn't feel like it was written for screen by any means. I could see it being a great show.
Yeah, I think I like to separate the two. And to me, I think if you just have great characters, those characters can translate on screen. I think this, when it becomes a TV show, if it becomes, it would definitely be like a character-driven show. And so, yeah, I wasn't consciously thinking about TV when I was writing it. I was kind of more into the developing the characters. So,
well, it shows. And some of my book club members here know that I really tend to choose books and read for characters rather than plot. So this fit right in with the kinds of books that I really love. So I congratulate you. Are you going to write another book?
Oh yeah, actually, I forgot about that. I am, yeah, I am writing another book, and it's a little bit of a departure from what I've done before in that it has a little bit of a thrillery element, but it's more like a psychological thriller. It's also still kind of funny. I like genre bending stuff. So it's about a woman who like rents a guest house behind this like wealthy couple's townhouse, and she like ends up getting involved in their drama. And so yeah.
Well, I'm very excited about that. I think that's all the questions I have. Does anybody else have any questions for Neel? Well, Neel, thank you so much for your time. I'm so happy to have been able to talk with you, and it's always such a treat to be able to like fully discuss a book and then actually talk to the person who created it. So it's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
And thank you all for reading the book.
Well, you know, I will tell you, Peggy, who's here, actually led a discussion on this book just like, what, 2 weeks ago, Peggy?
Yes, for the Rye Reading Room in Rye, New York.
So it actually became quite a challenge to get copies of the book for my book clubs.
Thank you.
So you're definitely getting passed around in the area. So
yeah.
So I know that I will continue to recommend it, and
thank you so much.
Can't wait to see what you're doing next.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy
All right.
your evening.
Thank you so much.
Bye.